everyone, welcome back and thank you so much for joining me again. Today in my kitchen, I'm working on a few things that I will have stocked in my pantry and freezer for the week. Today that would include a sourdough discard snack recipe, a sourdough croissant bread recipe, and also a dinner idea. First, I'm just going to grab all the ingredients and materials that I'm going to need to start making my sourdough discard breakfast bars. I was really impressed and really pleased with the minimal amount of ingredients that this recipe calls for. To start with, we are going to lightly melt our coconut oil. So I took this recipe and I tripled it, which I should have just doubled it for the 9x13 pan that I'm using. It ended up making my bars a little bit too thick for our liking, me and my family's. So next time I make this, I'm only going to double the recipe, not triple it, unless I'm going to use a much larger glass pan. But in the description below, you will find just a single portion recipe for a square 8x8 pan. While I'm allowing my coconut oil to lightly melt, I am adding in my sourdough discard. I'm using about a cup. You will need a little bit less for a single portion. Next on the ingredient list, I am adding in the honey. And so I'm going to mix these 3 liquid ingredients first before I add in anything else. Next, I'm adding in the coconut oil, and you want to be careful not to let it get hot. You just want to really lightly get it slightly warmed just so that it melts and so that it can get mixed well with everything else. These sourdough breakfast bars are a really great option for a quick, maybe even on-the-go breakfast. For example, we have homeschool co-op on Friday mornings, so this is a great thing to keep in my pantry on mornings when we don't really have time for me to make anything or to prep anything, so this would be a great grab-and-go kind of breakfast. Next, I'm adding in the oats, and I think this is what really gives it that breakfast flavor and also what makes these bars so filling. As a homeschool mother and homemaker who mostly cooks everything from scratch at home, I find it very important to have snacks readily available at home. This is actually one of the ways that I take the load of the week's work off my shoulders when I take a day to prep snacks. I found that one thing that stresses me out majorly is when I'm busy doing housework, homeschool, gardening, or other things around the home, and the kids begin to say one by one that they're hungry, but it isn't time for the next meal yet. This has happened way too many times to me, and so now I try not to allow myself to be put into that situation where I'm not prepared and I don't have any snacks to offer to the kids. To ensure that this doesn't happen, I always try to have healthy snacks in the fridge or in the pantry available for them to grab and go. I always choose to make such snacks that can be bulk prepared at the beginning of the week, and I always make sure to do a double or triple portion so that it can last us throughout the entire week. Usually I still have to make another batch, probably another time in the week, so about 2 times a week. The strawberry jam could not be a more perfect addition to this recipe. I love that it adds the moisture to these bars, and it also adds the perfect sweetness and that fruity berry breakfast taste. The original recipe calls for these bars to be baked at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes, but because I made mine in a much larger pan and I made a triple portion, mine ended up baking for probably about 50 to 55 minutes. Once I have used my sourdough discard for that recipe, now it is time for me to feed my starter because I will need it nice and active and bubbly later today. Because later today I am going to be making some sourdough croissant bread, which I will show you how to make step by step. Next up, I will be rolling into balls and freezing some cookie dough batter that our daughter made a couple of days ago. It's been sitting in the fridge. So lately we have been making sure that our freezer is always stocked with chocolate chip cookie dough batter. This has been really nice to have on hand, both for snack, just kids having that midday snack with freshly baked chocolate chip cookies and a nice cold glass of milk, or whether somebody stops by unexpectedly. It's so nice to just have those in your freezer and pull them out whenever you need. Be making a sourdough croissant bread. It's not exactly like a really flaky croissant, but it's more of a slightly flaky, almost like a croissant, but it's just a sourdough loaf that has butter in it, and it ends up being like this really nice, close to croissant texture. So the reason I'm giving this bread a try is because my sister messaged me last week saying that she made this bread and it's so much like a croissant. It's kind of flaky and really buttery, and she brought it to my parents' house and all of my siblings and everybody loved it. So she's like, you gotta try making this bread. And so tonight, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying this recipe. My sister just left me an audio recording telling me how to make it. So tonight, I'm attempting to make that bread. The great thing about this croissant bread recipe is because the base is just my regular sourdough bread recipe. The only difference is that I will be grating cold butter into the bread, which is what's going to give it that flaky, buttery taste and texture. So something important to note here is, as I've mentioned many times in my other videos, is that when I make sourdough bread, I never make just one. I always make a double batch right away. But in this case, I've found, and my sister actually kind of gave me this tip, that it's actually better to just prep one, just because it's much easier to distribute the butter when you have a smaller loaf. So I did a double portion this time, but next time I would just do, if I want to make two, I would make them in two separate bowls, because it is harder to kind of evenly distribute the butter in such a thick loaf of raw dough. So just as with regular sourdough bread, you mix the dough and then cover and set aside for 30 minutes. Something that I did that was really helpful for me when I was sprinkling the butter over my bread is I grated it and then I put it into the refrigerator until I needed it for a stretch and fold to add on into my sourdough. Also, just wanted to note on here that for the first stretch and fold in the first 30 minutes, you do not add any butter. You just do a regular stretch and fold and cover again. The second stretch and fold is when you begin to slowly incorporate all the butter. So you want to just do a little bit at a time during each stretch and fold, and you don't want to use up the whole butter all at once. Try to split it up into at least 2 separate stretch and fold sessions. So use about half on your first stretch and fold, adding in a little bit during each fold, and then the other half add in to each fold so this would be your third stretch and fold. And then your last stretch and fold, you just would stretch and fold and all the butter should already be there. Going back to what I was talking about when I was discussing having snacks on hand for the family. So one thing I like to consider when preparing snacks is how filling they are and to make sure that they're healthy options. I like to have things such as granola bars, cookies, sourdough bread, sourdough cinnamon rolls, dinner rolls, breakfast bars. When I'm prepared and I'm staying on top of everything in the kitchen, especially snack making, then I find myself feeling calm and at peace and also feeling accomplished and productive. If I break this cycle, then I find myself falling behind on pretty much everything, because then instead of working what I'm supposed to be working on at that moment, I am preparing food for the family that was not part of the flow or schedule for that time. So that puts me behind and causes me to feel stressed. So of course, I'd much rather avoid that and push myself to make those snacks even when I don't feel like it. It's like the saying, do something that your future self will thank you for. I sure do thank myself for taking that time and preparing the snacks on one day rather than choosing to be lazy or feeling too tired and ignoring the task. Some great snack options that are also filling can be things like a quick bowl of yogurt parfait. I'd put each child about half a cup of yogurt, granola, top it with bananas and blueberries or whichever fruits we have available at the moment, and then drizzle with some maple syrup. That's a great, healthy, and filling snack that'll hold them over until the next meal. Another great option would be to make a homemade trail mix. So you can mix things like their favorite nuts and some dried fruits, and maybe as a bonus, add in some chocolate chips. So the sourdough croissant bread turned out nice and buttery with a flaky crust. It tasted great and the whole family loved it. We really enjoyed it for lunch with some avocado, garlic salt, and some eggs. And that brings us over to dinner time. So tonight I am making a chicken in a cast iron pan with some sauce, and I'll be topping it with some sage and parsley just to give it a fresher look, a pretty garnish. And as a side, I'll be serving some pasta with garlic butter and some Parmesan cheese. So I ended up doing things a little bit backwards. I made the sauce first instead of preparing the chicken first, but it's all good. It ended up just great. So I made the sauce and then I just poured it all into one pan and then cooked the chicken and poured the sauce back over on top of the chicken. The recipe I was following for this meal did not call for sage. It actually called for spinach, which I didn't have any spinach, so I just ran out to my garden and grabbed some parsley and some sage. But I must say the sage is probably the highlight of this chicken. It just gave it the best flavor, and I'm so glad that I ended up adding the sage in. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found some helpful tips, some encouragement, motivation, or inspiration.